I remember hearing Bernard Arnault describe luxury, right? What he considered luxury to be. I'd be curious what your definition is. Like, what is your definition of luxury?
That's interesting. Well, nobody agrees on the definition of luxury. Super hard question,
It is.
And especially today, I think, it seems like everything is luxury. And because everything is luxury, nothing is really luxury anymore.
Yeah.
You see the luxury brands going downstream, like, to scale and kind of, I think, moving a little bit away from a pure luxury model. And you see the premium brands and, streetwear and fashion brands trying to move up and, let's say, use the luxury playbook to premiumize their offering and, build the brand equity. So, yeah, so, this is the topic of my class, like what is luxury, and once again, it's very difficult. So I would say, there are a few, let's say, characteristics of luxury brands that, everybody kind of recognize, like the quality, the excellence, the craftsmanship, higher service, higher design. You have exclusivity. You have very high price points. You have elements of scarcity, of heritage, all those things. So let's say those are a little bit the minimum, because you could, check those boxes and still not be a luxury brand, because actually the luxury status, so to speak, is given to you by the perception of consumers. So it's not like you I mean, I know many brands do that today, but they say, well, we are a luxury brand, but that doesn't mean that they are a luxury brand, really. Something that you can decide for yourself. So so there are, let's say, those elements, but then, luxury means different things for different people, because it's depending on the context, depending on your culture, depending on where you are in terms of social class or things like this. Luxury is going to mean something totally different.
Yeah.
So that's why it's something that is very difficult. But what we can recognize is, like, in any type of sector, probably there is a luxury player, a pure luxury player, that is kind of implementing a pure luxury strategy. And I use those examples with my students to kind of tell them, okay, so this is the top of the pyramid. This is kind of, the genuine luxury playbook. And it's kind of easy to say, well, this brand belongs to this category, and then the others, or, we can discuss. And the frontiers, the boundaries are very blurred. So, and once again, there are also, huge cultural differences. So the first thing is, like, I think people typically underestimate how different a luxury strategy is. So that's the first thing, and this is what I try to teach my students, like, fighting the stereotypes, and also showing them that it's different.
Yeah.
And then there are huge cultural differences that still exist, and maybe that are going to be even more important, in the future. We were all thinking a few years ago that there was this kind of global luxury consumer that was the same across, across geographies. But I just did a survey with colleagues of mine, and we kind of found out that those cultural differences are still there, very much alive. And so once again, luxury is going to be appealing for different reasons for different customers. Like, in China, it's more elitism. In France, it will be more about heritage. In the US, people You'll be probably looking more at, exclusivity or, things like this. So you have to communicate differently. You have to emphasize, different attributes in your value proposition and the benefits that you are providing your customer.
Yeah, it certainly will. I mean, you have to imagine it would vary by culture, right? Because so much for me, so much of luxury is defined by like I can, like you said, exclusivity. I can have something that someone else doesn't have, right? Whether that's via scarcity or price point or distribution or whatever it is, right? And so I remember having a discussion with somebody. They're like, we don't, because we talk about it a lot in the context of influencers, right? Which is like, and I think historically, the mindset has changed. But call it 5 years ago, 10 years ago, a lot of the luxury brands said, "Hey, I know this is really important, but like, I don't want that person to be talking about me, right?" And because those aren't my customers, right? The people that listen to them are not buying my products. And I was like, well, what makes you think, like, why do people want to buy those products? They want to buy them because I can buy them and they cannot, right? And so creating demand amongst consumers that cannot get access to your products is actually, I think, fairly critical, right? To success. It's not just about, okay, I only want to reach the people that can afford me or can access me or can whatever. Yeah, I want to take your course now
Yeah.
and actually think about it more deeply.
So I'm not sure that you create demand, you create aspiration, which
Okay.
which is
Yeah.
something different because so another thing that I teach in my class is like we are talking about those stereotypes, and I'm going to come back to just what you said, try to respond to
Yeah.
this comment. But a lot of people see luxury as conspicuous consumption. Basically,
Okay.
like, the big logo, it has to be in your face, you have to recognize it, you have to see it, because basically, once again, the stereotype is like people buy luxury to show off.
Yep.
And
Yep.
but this is a very reductive, perception of luxury, and I would say it's just the tip of the iceberg, and there is
Mm-hmm.
of what I call, invisible luxury consumption or stealth luxury, that you don't see on purpose and you don't know about because you are not a core consumer. Because
Mm-hmm.
to create demand, people have to be willing. Let's say they need to want your brand and your product, but they also need to be able to pay for it.
Yes.
You see what I mean? So you have to have both. So if people cannot buy your products, then there is no interest, no need, to target them or to communicate about your brand to them, because maybe they will never, afford that. And I think this is what some invisible or very quiet, those brands that use quiet signals. So those invisible luxury brands, this is what they want to do. They don't want to target an audience that do not belong to their target market. They don't want to use mass marketing or invest a huge amount of money in mass marketing, because I mean it defeats the purpose. So it's more like they communicate to a very narrow segment, and they are very focused. And this is why word of mouth and things like that, private events, they use those type of marketing activities to recruit clients, so that they only target those ones that can pay and want those type of products. So this is why I think a lot about what I call the tyranny of social media.
Mm.
And I think a lot of those, what I call, vanity metrics, like, oh, look how many followers I have, or look, all those people, talking about my brand. For some luxury brands, I cannot help thinking that some of those people may never be, real luxury consumers in the future. But some of them are very vocal about the brand, and they love the brand, and then they could they react sometimes to what the brand is doing, and they say, well, you shouldn't be doing that, or you shouldn't say that, on this, on that, and that could backlash a little bit. So I think this is an idea that is intriguing to me. And I think that in the future, probably some brand will go step back, and try to be a little bit more discreet, or do things that are more invisible, instead of and with all those problems of inequality and things like this, and also controversies. There might be an interest. I don't know. It just
Yeah, no, absolutely.
that's interesting, because you mentioned that, like, yeah, from some perspective, and for mass brands, I think that makes sense. Like, being visible and trying to recruit as many people as possible, and that makes sense. For a luxury strategy, to a certain point, maybe. But I think at some point, maybe you reach, yeah, maybe it becomes unproductive. I don't know. Just my thought.
Yeah, no, it's a real question, right?
I
And I think that
study that in the
we we've definitely had the luxury. We've definitely had the opportunity, right? So I think we work now with 5 of the 10 largest luxury brands in the world. Work very extensively, LVMH, Kering, on down the list. And there's two things that I think about, right? I do think desirability matters, right? And perceived desirability, other people desire this, right? And I can have it. I do think that matters. I think it's pretty significant. But I think the other thing that's really important, and where we did see brands tend to kind of stick their heads in the sand historically, is it's not necessarily about targeting or promotion, right? As much as it is about, really for me, almost clienteling, right? So what would happen is you would have somebody like a Jeffree Star who has pink hair, tattoos, drives a pink Lamborghini, right? And then saying like, oh, I don't want Jeffree to be the face of my brand. You say, well, the reality is that he is, whether you want him to or not, right? He has tens of millions of fans. He is the number one influencer for Chanel, the number one influencer for Dior, the number one influencer for Gucci. And he also happens to be the largest customer for Gucci by revenue globally, right? And so for him, and if you actually look at the majority of the people that are in this ecosystem, they're not somebody that you would choose to be the face of your upcoming campaign. But they're often, consumers, sometimes very large consumers. And I think the people that follow them are following them because they're inherently very interested in luxury products, luxury branding. And so it's less about saying like, hey, I want to go out and target this social media personality, and more about the fact that, Gucci will have around 13,000 influencers that will create close to 300,000 pieces of content about them each year, just in the US. And 95+% of that is people just talking about Gucci because they love Gucci and because they're into the products, and more than likely because they're consumers of that products. And I think there's frankly historically been a disconnect between what luxury brands want their customers to be and who the luxury brands customers actually are, right? I think there's a big disconnect between and particularly between branding and actual end customer profile. But yeah, it will be interesting to see how it evolves over time, right? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think what you do is super important. I mean, as you said,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's not about what, those brands want, or, as you say, the demographic or whatever. It's like with social media, I mean, the influencers or even, consumers are taking the power. So it's like
Yeah.
you cannot control or anything. And I think in that way, brands have done, the good thing about like trying to collaborate with those people, and instead of antagonizing, and, uh,
Yeah.
and just not looking at it. so no, on that thing, I on that, aspect, I totally agree with you. And what you do is super important, and I kind of, it's a no-brainer that those brands should be working with your organization, and especially with the trends of the democratization of luxury and the massification of luxury. Those brands, we are coming from a system where they had only a few stores and they were accessible just to a few customers globally, to a situation now where anybody can have access, anybody can see them. They have hundreds of stores everywhere on the planet, so it's not a problem of accessibility anymore. So just by the sheer scale of those business, and I think this is probably one of the a big shift in luxury recently. I think luxury brands have understood and have found a way to be super big while retaining, their prestige or their desirability, and things like this. So this is kind of, I think, this has been a revelation, I think, for them, because they were on a different model. And just in parenthesis, this is why, Harvard, MIT, all those schools, I think in the future will be able to have millions of students while keeping, their prestige and aura and everything. Because you see it, in other sectors. But what I am, so yeah, I agree with that. The only thing is, like, um, managing this crowd on social media, and the problem is, like, the more you expose yourself to so many different people, you have to be ready and willing to manage, the backlash when it happens. And we see that, with social media, we see that with some people, we see that in China, we see that, in many different ways, where, consumer come back to the brand and say, we don't like you to do that, we don't want you to do that, you shouldn't be doing that. And I think this is a threat, to innovation and creativity, because typically fashion brand and luxury brand have been a kind of the forefront, no, of innovation, and even sometimes social innovation, like pushing the boundaries, no. And then suddenly you have to be very cautious about what you say, what you do, because there is always somebody that you could offend, so yeah, you understand what I mean. It's like,
yeah, totally.
a double-edged sword,
Yeah,
so
that was the exact word that I had, the double-edged sword. And I think it's I think just almost from an evolutionary perspective, right? We've never been exposed to so many opinions all at the same time, right? And people have a hard time conceptualizing, like, oh, I've had these 3 negative comments about this particular initiative or whatever it is. But in the context of the number of consumers that you have as a brand, right, those 3 comments are very, very small. And then you kind of pair that with the pace and rapidity with which something can become a big deal, right? Like how fast it can accelerate into the kind of national attention. It's tough. It's a tough environment to navigate. So yeah, it's I'm glad I'm leading a B2B brand and not a B2C brand. Much fewer opinions, which is nice.